guys. Is this microphone on? Can you all hear me? Perfect. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk. It's good to be at IOSDev UK. It's kind of that veteran conference that is a staple of the calendar and has been for so many years. And it's so great to come back and actually be in person after having 2 years off. I wanted to talk today about unintended consequences. And I call it a tale of morality in the digital world. And it's kind of an amalgamation of different experiences that I've had, different things that have happened through my life, and different things that I think as engineers we need to take responsibility for as we think about what our roles are, as our jobs dictate, and what our moral obligations are as engineers. Before we begin, a little bit about me. So my name is Steve Westgarth. I am the global head of engineering at Haleon, and you're all probably going, what's Haleon? I've never heard of that. Haleon is a brand new company that formed earlier this year, having been demerged from GSK, so GlaxoSmithKline. It's the consumer healthcare division, so we own brands like Sensodyne, and Panadol and Centrum, and all of those things you'll have bought from your local pharmacist. So a predominantly healthcare-based company. And we're looking at how we can connect consumers to healthcare professionals in ever more interesting and innovative ways. I'm British, if you hadn't picked up from my accent. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And in my spare time, I've been developing for iOS probably since iOS was a thing. I didn't make day one of the App Store. I remember kind of scrabbling to get an app into the App Store when we could first do that. I think I made week 2 or 3. But I've been tinkering and playing with iOS for a lot of years, hence the fact I've come to IOSDev UK. And I also run a podcast called The Engineering Leaders. So if you're interested in hearing about some things which are engineering leadership related, or how we're approaching kind of challenges at a management level within companies, and how we're thinking about engineering as a career path and all of those sorts of things, do have a listen to The Engineering Leader. It's generally a conversation that I have with engineering leaders working for all sorts of companies up and down the UK and the wider world. In fact, many people at IOSDev UK, some of the speakers, have been on the podcast over the last few months. So let's go back to the talk, and I thought I'd make you some work just to kind of kick us off. So can you all just take a moment to think of a CEO from a large tech company? You can think of anybody you want. I mean, I'm assuming that maybe the crowd might be a little bit lazy. Is that kind of where our heads went? Maybe. And obviously Tim Cook, an amazingly famous CEO. You could have thought of all sorts of other people, maybe Satya Nadella from Microsoft, or any of the other amazing tech companies we kind of thought about. My first challenge to you is, did you intentionally think of a man? Was that something which entered your psyche at the point you thought of who that male CTO or CEO was? And there are many examples. There are many examples of female CEOs within tech companies. But if you just challenge yourself for a second, even looking at that slide, think of a female CTO. Who's got one out of interest? Put your hand up if you thought of a female CTO of a tech company. There are some. There are all sorts of influencers, female influencers that are influencing all sorts of tech companies. This was the Hot Topics Top Influencers, which was published a few months ago. And there are all sorts of empowering, amazing women that are doing all sorts of fantastic things in tech company. And actually, if you look at the diversity at IOSDev UK this year, it's amazing to see how many more women there are here at this conference than there have been in previous years. And I think that's true. We're starting to see more representation. But it's still a male-dominated industry. I think that would probably be a fair statement. You might disagree with me, and it's absolutely fine to disagree with me if you do. But that's our problem, right? So as engineers who work in this industry, we kind of look around us, we kind of think about our representation, we think, well, why do more women not want to become engineers? Why do more women not want to work with us? Is it something about kind of us as a collective that maybe we're a bit off-putting? Maybe there's a way we kind of bond together in kind of our little circles? I don't know. But we do know that at GCSE level, girls outperform boys. So there's something happens between GCSE and going into the workplace that means that actually women are being put off from coming into our industry. And yes, it's getting better, but there's a long way to go. I want to talk a little bit about mental models. Now, I first came across the term mental models probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I didn't really understand what a mental model was, so I did what everybody would do, and I Googled it. So I Googled to find mental models to understand what we're really talking about. And I went to Wikipedia, because that's clearly the go-to place you go to understand mental models. And Wikipedia says that a mental model is an explanation of someone's thought process about how something works in the real world. So think about what we've just done. We thought about a CEO of a tech company, and we thought about the obvious choice. We thought who we went to. We thought it was maybe a CTO, and we thought, what does that vision look like? And maybe we have a mental model to say, it's a man, maybe it's a straight white male, who knows? Maybe that's moving on, maybe that perception is changing. But there are all sorts of examples of mental models in society. So let's give another example. Let's talk about pedals of a car. Who drives? You want to drive? Lots of people drive, great. Which pedal is the accelerator? Are we sure it's definitely the one on the right? We're happy, that's the accelerator? Great. So let's think about, what if we messed with your mental model a little bit? What if we decided that actually the accelerator was going to be on the left? If we changed that tomorrow and you got into your car, maybe we told you, maybe we didn't.
Let's change it in software.
Let's change it in software, who knows? What would that do to you? What chaos would you have on the road if you were hitting the clutch instead of the accelerator? Could get more dangerous. You could put the accelerator in place of the brake. But you know what? When Henry Ford invented the car, this was a genuine conversation. You can Google this and kind of find out about it. But he looked at what the best way to power the car would be. Did you want to press a button and kind of hold your button onto something? Did you want to put your foot onto something? What order did the pedals need to go into? There was an active conversation about it in the early 1900s. And he created, this standard mental model, the mental model that we know today. And that's stuck through time. So I think we'd all agree that asking people to change their mental model is a little bit risky. You know, if we change what somebody perceives that something should be, that could cause some challenges for us. So I want to tell you a story. It's actually a story I've told at IOSDev UK before in a different talk that I gave. It's about this guy. This is a guy called Joe Leach. Really interesting bloke. He wrote this book called Psychology for Designers. If you haven't read it, it's a really quick read, really worth getting a hold of. I went to a conference probably 7 or 8 years ago now, it's a long time ago, and he related this story about how he went to Argentina back in 2002. And when he visited Argentina, he went and used a cash point. And he put his card into the cash point, and he put in his card, entered his PIN number, selected withdraw cash, selected the amount, and the card was returned, the cash was dispensed, and the machine swallowed his card. So that was obviously a big problem for him. You know, the machine swallowed his card. He had to go to the bank. He had to go and get a new card. He had to get some emergency cash. It caused him all sorts of issues. But never mind. Your life moves on. 10 years later, he went back to Argentina in about 2012, and he used the cash point again. And he went through the same process, and the cash point in Argentina swallowed his card for a second time. And Joe went, that's ridiculous. You can't possibly go to a country twice and have my card swallowed twice. I've been using cash points for the intervening 10 years in lots of different places. My card's never been swallowed anywhere else. What is it about Argentina that is different? And when he analysed the user journey, the difference was this. That in Argentina, the cash was dispensed and then the card was returned. Let's do that again. So that's the standard cash point journey you would go through with any cash point pretty much anywhere in the world. In Argentina, those two last steps are reversed. Now, did the people in Argentina, the product manager that was developing the software that Argentinian cash points use, think, you know what, I really want to fuck people up. I want to mess up those last two steps. Is that really what that product manager thought? I'm going to say no, they probably didn't think of that. Wasn't even a deliberate decision by the product manager. Was it just an engineer who was working at their desk, programming away? Maybe they just got the steps the wrong way around. They didn't understand the way that it was everywhere else in the world, and that's kind of what they put in. But one way or another, we ended up with the steps reversed. And actually, Joe had what's called the golden moment. So when you have your cash dispensed, that's your golden moment at the cash point. You think you can walk away. All Joe had done was walk away from the cash point. and therefore the machine had kept his card. Something as simple as that, probably not a deliberate mistake, has caused Joe huge issues in his holiday twice, and who knows how many other tourists that have visited Argentina. So, let's think about some other examples. Let's put ourselves into the place of a product manager. Who loves their product manager, by the way? Amazing. Who hates their product manager? No, we don't want to know that. It's all good. Names changed to protect the innocent. So, let's say that this happened. This could be a real scenario. So, you are responsible for launching a new blood test results service. The business case suggests that the system will be used by 10 million customers each year and will save your business approximately $1 million every month that it's live and active. Our business was expecting the service to go live 8 weeks ago, but the development of the MVP has taken a little bit longer than expected. The MD has told you, as the product manager, that it is critical to get this system live as soon as possible. However, you're responsible for the budget, you're the product manager, the project is overspent. And in this fiscal year, you don't think the business will be able to stomach spending any more money on it. And actually, next year, you don't think you'll get any more money either. Okay, so take a moment, take in that scenario, think about the background of what you are facing as the product manager, the pressure that's on your head, the drivers, the outcomes you're trying to drive for your business, and think about this next question. So your test lead, your test manager has come to you, and your test manager has asked you, we have completed the testing of the new blood test results service. Under peak load volumes, we've observed that the database query fails once every 1,000 times. In that circumstances, the customer will be redirected to an operator. So it's fine, they'll still get the answer that they need. Is it okay if we push the system to production and you can prioritize fixing that bug in a future sprint? So product manager's thinking, I know I've got no more money this year. I might not have any more money next year. If I say yes to this question, the likelihood is that this is going to go live and it might never get fixed. But it's okay, because in the circumstance that there's an issue, that the query fails, the customer will be redirected to an operator. They'll still get the answer that they need. Is it okay to push that system live to production? Who would do it? Let's have a show of hands.
You could argue it'll get you money next year.
You might do.
Because you've now got
You've got a business case. Maybe you have. Would your CEO prioritise that? Who thinks, actually different question, maybe different to whether you would prioritise it. Whose company would prioritise that?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 or 3 in the room. Most companies, I think, we're looking around the room would say, you know what, more important to get that system out the door, right? So let's tell you a real story. So I recently attended an STI screening clinic. We're all friends, I don't mind sharing, it's all good. So the way this works, you go to the screening clinic, you have a blood test, you get given a telephone number you've got to ring. So you ring up the number, and that's how you get your results. So the day after I'd been, or a few days later, I called the number of the STI cleaning service, and I got an automated system answered the phone, and it said, please can you enter the 8-digit code that you've got, so that we can identify your test results. So I entered the 8-digit code, no problem, that was on the back of the thing I'd been given by the person who'd taken the test. The system then said, please wait for an operator. Okay? So I waited. I waited for 30 minutes. Now, I'd used this system before, and I was used to the system coming back to me and saying, it's all fine, your results are clear. I assumed at this point that I had something hideous. The things that were going through my head were pushing me out of my mind as to what could be going wrong. Because I knew how the system worked. I was a regular user. I practiced good sexual health, you'll all be pleased to know. So I waited 30 minutes. And by the time I got to the operator, I was literally going out of my head. An operator says, what's your 8-digit code? And I gave you that half an hour ago, do you really need it again? So I gave them my 8-digit code, and the operator said, your test result's negative. And I went, what? And she went, you're not happy with that? And I went, well, no, I was expecting something hideous. Give me what I want. No, but I got to the end of that journey, and I was told my test result was negative. So yes, there was an overwhelming amount of relief. Yes, that was great news for me. But the anguish that I'd been put through as a customer was horrendous. So, put yourself into my shoes. Is this okay? Now, it might be only happening once. Maybe it's once in a million times. Maybe the product manager knew about the test issue and knew that the query failed once every 1,000 times. Maybe the company knew it and went, doesn't really matter, they'll get the result anyway. Is it morally acceptable for a company to make that choice? Now, everybody in the room will have a different answer. I'm not going to shame you by asking you yes or no. That is something very personal to yourselves, and something very personal for every company that you might want to work with. But let's talk about what's really driving that. Because there are reasons behind this that is trying to drive a company to get that system out into production. And it's generally because of this phrase. And this is something that we all talk about every day in our companies. We want agility. We want to leverage speed to market. We want to execute faster. We want to deliver more. Let's respond to change. If we can get that system into production, that's going to get us ahead of the competition. It's going to do something that's going to accelerate us. It's going to make more money. There's a business case associated with it. And you know what? These are all really valid reasons. Let me tell you about the Choluteca Bridge. So this is the Choluteca Bridge in Honduras, and it was built in the early 90s. And believe it or not, at the point that the Choluteca Bridge was built, it was actually built over the river. I know that might sound a little surprising. But then in 1993, there was an earthquake in Honduras, and the river literally moved from beneath the bridge. It moved to the right. It moved to the right before the bridge had finished construction. So I mean, that's pretty bad, right? I mean, for the bridge, if you were the bridge, you'd be pretty gutted that you never actually served your purpose. But this is the reality of what we're doing in our companies, right? We're building software, and if we don't get it out to production on time, or we don't do what the market needs, we all know how bad the economic climate is right now. Our companies might not be here to survive. We might not get the next round of investment. We might not achieve the purpose that we've set out to do. We might not give the customer what they want. And if we don't give the customer what they want, then we might suffer the same fate as the Choluteca Bridge. So companies are constantly balancing this conundrum. Do we want to release later, make sure that the database query doesn't fail? Or do we want to release early and maximize the market opportunity? There's a moral question within that. There's an ethical question. And it's a question that companies, all of your companies, are probably taking every day. But at least everything we've spoken about so far, they are intelligent and deliberate choices. The product manager knew that database query failed once every 1,000 times and said, you know what, I'm going to go to production anyway. It's an active decision on the part of the company. But what about the consequences that aren't visible? Let's talk about some of those. So we recently at Haleon went through a process of selecting a database that we wanted to power Haleon. So we were talking about a NoSQL database. We wanted a flexible schema. Scalability was really important to us. We were looking at simplicity. We needed to be cloud first, lots of community support. There were lots of big questions we needed to make sure that our database provider could meet for us. And actually, as we started talking, we realized there were a whole bunch of other requirements that outside of engineering that people also cared about. So lots of other stakeholders kind of got involved, and we started talking around availability and uptime guarantees and business continuity and compliance, interoperability, all of these things which were very important to our business, and making sure that the database did what we needed it to do. And of course, data is the heartbeat of our business. We're in a position where, as a large enterprise, if we were to suffer a data breach, you can be faced with an unlimited fine from the Information Commissioner if you get your data security wrong. So it's really important that our database provider of choice allows you to do great things to protect the data. So we chose MongoDB, and we were really impressed by the fact it had role-based access control. It had data encryption at rest. We had the ability to log and audit what people were doing with the data. We could limit connections to the database to make sure that only the right people could access it in the right space at the right time. So lots of really good pieces of functionality. Now, as an engineer, if you hadn't implemented role-based access control, how many product managers would know that it hadn't been done? How many would care? I mean, surely that doesn't need to be prioritised, right? It's not that important. But actually, if we think about it, there were 1,862 security incidents involving data in the USA during 2021 alone. 1,862 security incidents. And there's no limited fine from the Information Commissioner. So, you as an engineer, you've got pressure on you. You need to get something out the door. It's really important that goes live. Look, the business case won't be met. Is it okay if we kick the can down the road, if we don't implement those things we need to implement? Maybe we haven't had time to turn on auditing and logging. Maybe we haven't focused on that right now. Is that okay? Maybe it is, who knows? But let's put that into numbers. 55% of data breaches were committed by organised criminal groups, including state actors. Of 37% of data breaches used stolen credentials to access secure systems. And this one's really interesting. 30% of data breaches were committed by internal users or individuals who were known to the company. Where do you sit on that? Is that your responsibility? Somebody else caring about it? We've all got security teams, or many of us will have. What if the security team just doesn't know the vulnerabilities there? Is that our responsibility? Whose head's on the block? Would anybody even know? This next stat I love. 74% of companies who suffer a data breach don't even know it's happened. And that's only of the ones that found out that the data breach had happened within a year. What about the companies that never know the data breach has happened? Because this is happening all of the time. But then there's worse. So these are all of the companies that are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to protect their users' data. They're coming from a point of view of saying that, yeah, we want to do the right thing by our users. We know we've got business pressures. We know we need to achieve agility. We know we need to get ahead of the market. But hey, we want to protect our users' data. What about the companies who intentionally exploit their users? Now, you may look at that and go, well, there aren't very many of those. I mean, you know, who would do that? So let's put ourselves into the place of a product manager again. Love my scenarios. Your product manager has come to you, whatever company you work in, and this is the scenario they presented to you. We need to collect data about how our users are using our app. We already have a custom browser which renders third-party content. Is there a way for us to be able to find out how a user is interacting with the content in the custom browser so that we can analyze the data in order to improve the user's experience? I hear it's possible to subscribe to users' keystrokes via JavaScript. Please can we do this and store the data for later analysis? Now you all laugh, because we all know it's technically possible, right? But I mean, surely there wouldn't be any companies out there doing that. That would be ridiculous, right? So, there's a guy that I know called Felix Kraus. Many of you will have heard of him. In fact, he's possibly even spoken to iOS Dev UK in the past, so no, maybe not. So Felix, I don't know where he's working now. He was at Google. He's
he's far too cool to come to our restaurant.
Absolutely. Lives in the US, worked for some amazing companies. He's the guy who created Fastlane tools, if anyone's come across Fastlane before. And on August the 10th this year, so literally a month ago, he published an article. And he showed how people are using these JavaScript injections within custom browsers within apps and what they're doing. You can see here by the media attention that he got. He ended up on MacRumors, he was on 9 to 5, he was on The Guardian, Lifehacker, everybody picked up on it. Because he highlighted things like this. What does Instagram do? The Instagram app injects their JavaScript code into every website shown, including when clicking on ads. Even though the injected script doesn't currently do this, running custom scripts on a third-party website allows them to monitor all user interactions. That means every button clicked, every link tapped, text selections, screenshots, as well as form inputs like passports and credit card numbers. Instagram today subscribes to those events. What are they doing with it? What's the point? Now, the overwhelming technical consensus is that privacy matters. Most organizations are going to great lengths to protect users' privacy. Look at what Apple have been doing. So they've recently introduced as part of iOS 14.5 the app tracking transparency that puts users in control. Do you remember the Facebook kind of objections to this? And all of the, the news and Mark Zuckerberg kind of this is going to destroy our business model, how can we possibly work? And Safari blocks third-party cookies by default. Google Chrome is phasing out the use of third-party cookies, which is great. And Firefox has just announced total cookie protection by default to prevent any cross-page tracking. That's all great news. Look at this. This is a series of apps. You may have heard of some of them, you may even use some of them. TikTok doesn't have an option to open in the default browser. So if you go onto TikTok and you open a link in their custom browser, they have the ability to subscribe to these events and you can't do anything about it. You're literally trapped into that user flow. So, in the room, we're all engineers. We work for big companies. That use case that product managers presented, that could be a real thing. If your product manager came to you, tomorrow and said, can you allow me to subscribe to these events via a custom browser? Would you implement it? Is that something you would go ahead and do? Because your job depends on it, right? You're working for a company who's asking you to do something, they're paying your wages, they're paying your mortgage, they're paying your bills. If you push back and say no, would that be okay? Would your company be in a position where they would accept your pushback and say, oh, no problem, we didn't really mean to implement that feature? Or would they not? And if you didn't do it, would they just get somebody who did? So, the software we build is our collective shared responsibility. The software that goes into production is the software that we write as engineers. It's the software that might be imagined, envisaged by our companies. But actually, I would argue that we as a community are kind of the last line of defense. If you've got companies that's kind of saying to you, do this, they can only do it because there's people like us that kind of go, okay, we'll do it, no problem. So I would argue we have a moral obligation here. We have a moral obligation to say, hey, how is my company going to do that? What are they going to use that data for? Is that the right thing we should be doing? And then, yeah, maybe we do need to push back. But sometimes doing that isn't as easy as it sounds, right? So my question to you in this talk today is, would you? And then I have a call to action. Because in reality, we don't work for companies that wouldn't necessarily do that. We all work for nice companies, that have got really good relationships, we all love our product managers, right? So, think about this. We all write apps, we all write code, we all push things out into production every day. Think about the software that you write. And just take a moment to think about what the unintended consequences of that software you have in production could be. Now, you might say that your software is all great and perfect and awesome. But I bet that actually, if you think about it from a user's perspective, maybe there are some journeys that you haven't kind of thought through, or some edge cases where things could be exploited in random ways. And if there are things you know about, there might be things that nobody else in your company knows about, because you're the engineers that are building this stuff, right? You know where all of the dark skeletons are in the closets. So when you return to your business, my ask is, maybe it's a bit unreasonable to say you're going to push back against the entire business model of what your business is doing, but can you just make the world a little bit of a better place? Can you draw attention to something that's happening in your software that's a problem for one of your users? Maybe something that's going to cause a security issue. Maybe something that's going to inadvertently affect a user journey. Maybe something that could harm a user in some way that nobody is aware of. Because if you brought that to the attention of your product manager, or maybe if your product manager doesn't take it seriously, their boss or the CEO or whoever in your company cares most about this stuff. Because I bet if you took my example of the STI screening clinic and you sat down in front of your CEO and you showed them the journey that your company had given me in that situation, I bet the CEO wouldn't be happy with that. They may even find a little bit of money that it needed to fix it. But they're only going to do that if they know the problem exists. And the only way they're going to know the problem exists is if you take responsibility and you decide to bring it to their attention. So my question to you is, can you take an action that's going to make your users' lives just that little bit better? Thank you very much. And just